Are we waiting for Dave or he's
No,
not?
he's traveling, so he's not at all sure he can make it. Yark is going to
I'll
do
be
the
Dave
honors.
today. Yes, I'll be Dave today. Although I'm Yarik with Center for Open Neuroscience at PBS Department of Dartmouth College. From that center, it's just for those people on YouTube who have no clue. From that center, I lead ReproNim TRND3 effort, and that's where we are trying to make neuroscience also as open as my browser with dozens of browser tabs, during screen sharing sessions. And today I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Chris Rorden, the neuroinformagician and neuroimaging wizard, the mastermind behind tools that have saved numerous neuroscientists from digital despair. Most notably, people know him as mastermind behind DCM2NIX, which is the core tool behind HUDICONF converter, which we blessed the world with from our side. And DCM2NIX has probably converted into NiiVu's more medical images than we collectively converted coffee into the code through these years. So by working on that, Chris became the ultimate knowledge base of all the bugs and deviations from DICOM standard across manufacturers. And that is what he's trying to hide away from us, so we could safely coordinate on working on with NiiVu's and bits where everything is really harmonious. So Chris has exciting academic career, which he started as an undergrad in psychology at UCSD. Graduating in 1993. That's when I started to learn Borland Pascal, I think. Then he got a PhD in experimental psychology at Cambridge University across the pond and went on tour through all kinds of places in United Kingdom and then United States of America. Now, for over a decade, he is serving as a professor in the Department of Psychology and endowed chair of neuroimaging at the University of South Carolina. And today he will present us, as you see from the title page, NiiVue, the in-browser viewer of neuroimaging data. This WebGL-powered tool might finally convince clinicians that browsers can do more than just display cat videos and error messages. Please welcome Chris Rorden, the man who makes neuroimaging accessible while the rest of us are still trying to remember which way radiological convention is.
All right, thanks, Yark, for the introduction. And I do want to say this is a good group of people who put together this visualization software. So I'm sort of the front man for a good group. Joining us is Chris Drake, who's our lead developer, and Taylor Van Eyck is also one of our cores. And Franco Pastelli has brought a lot of vision from his Brain Life team. And I would say, to me, visualization is core. Even the title neuroimaging kind of gives away that imaging is really important to what we do. And so being able to look at those images is crucial, no matter what stage you're interested in, whether it's thinking about acquisition and making sure that our images don't have any artifacts in them, or when we think about the pre-processing and thinking about the ways that some of the automated tools that we depend on can sometimes go awry. And my analogy for this is I think that a lot of our neuroimaging pipelines now are a little bit like self-driving cars, where they're typically very robust and will work efficiently. But occasionally, if you don't take a look at what they're doing, it'll end up in a catastrophic error. And we also depend on visualization for dissemination and inference of understanding what our data means. So at all stages of what we do in our field, being able to look at the data and understand the data is really crucial. And I would say that there's a real need for our field to have domain-specific tools that we can use. We can't just use Photoshop or Illustrator or Blender, one of those off-the-shelf tools, because the type of data we deal with is really quite unique. We deal with three-dimensional voxels that we acquire. We then compute streamlines from diffusion data. We have statistical maps. We develop meshes, and we create connectomes. So we have all of these unique representations that we really want to view simultaneously. And so we need a domain-specific tool to do this. And the good news is we have a lot of free tools for this. In one sense, you could also say this is one of the unfortunate aspects of our field, is that since we have a lot of tools, and each one of these tools tries to do a little bit of everything, what you can end up with is that end users feel a little locked in, that they might be using a tool like FreeSurfer that is used to FreeSurfer's own private formats like MGH format, or they might be using AFNI that is used to AFNI's header and brick format. So there's custom formats. And also, since each one of these visualization tools tries to do a little bit of everything, they tend to have a little bit of an overwhelming user interface that they can seem a little bit cluttered. And then also just from a general point of view, I would say that it also, having this redundancy, has a negative effect that all these teams are continuously having to evolve and update their tools. And so there's this continuous need to have something that's state of the art and doing what we want to do. And the other way I would think about it is, if you think about all the teams developing visualization tools, they've had to continuously evolve. If you think about AFNI, when Bob Cox developed it in the early 90s, he created it on silicon graphics machines that don't exist anymore. And yet his same core compute code can be compiled and run on ARM architecture that didn't exist when he created it. But in contrast, visualization tools are always meeting the latest tricks of the trade of what our video game friends are using and taking advantage of some of those features. And so we're constantly having to evolve our tools. And on top of it, I would say that we're now at an age where there's a requirement for us to have a revolution rather than an evolution in how we do visualization. We're starting to have cloud tools. We have a lot of different devices. So mouse gestures on a computer, touch on a phone, or a pen on a tablet. And so all of these things really make us think, maybe this is a time to come together and think about what would a common visualization tool look like that can leverage the new platforms and the new devices that we have available. And so that's the basic idea of NiiVue. And it's already started to gain quite a bit of leverage. So quite a bit of different teams have started to embed NiiVue in what they're doing. And so while I'm going to show you a few of the applications and a few of the core users that are already using it, really what I want to do is give you an idea of this is our vision of where we're going and how we can really use collaborations from different teams to try to harness some of these features that we've put into NiiVue, and how we benefited by having these collaborations with these teams that have their own use cases and their own data types. So I want to talk through a few different things we've done with this. And one was Sacha Ghosh had created a set of AI models called No Brainer, and Sergey Pliss and his team was able to, with his BrainChop work, to get these things to work on the edge. And so this allows AI models to work seamlessly in the cloud. And so this is an example where with Brain to Print, you can go to our webpage, brain2print.org, and you can simply drag and drop an MRI scan onto the webpage. And then you can choose to segment it to find the tissue. And then you can choose to turn that segmented image into a mesh. And then you can say that mesh to your computer and print it as a 3D printing. And so rather than installing a whole series of different software, saying you have to install FreeSurfer on your computer, you have to get a license for that, we need MeshLab to create a mesh out of the images, and all these other things we can do. If you have someone who comes to your center and they've got a brain scan done at your center, you can say, hey, you can take your brain scan, you can drag and drop it on a web page, and you can then 3D print your brain. So it's one example of an application. And this is what I would refer to as, rather than a cloud-based application, it's actually an edge application. That the compute, the artificial intelligence is actually happening on the end user's computer, regardless of what type of graphics card, regardless of what type of hardware. There's no software for them to install. And this edge application is also really nice for us as developers, because we always have a problem if we have cloud resources. If our tools become very popular, all of a sudden we have to create hardware for all the users. One of the nice things to think about with edge applications is every time a new user comes, they're providing their own computer to do the processing. And from the user's point of view, this is also really nice for privacy. So you can think about a lot of clinical situations where it's not just segmenting the brain, but finding brain injury. The data never leaves their own computer, that all the processing is done locally. But that's kind of one example of how we can embed a web tool and do something that we couldn't do before, is an end-to-end from MRI scan to a 3D printable mesh without having to install any software. Another example of this is within BrainLife, that is a cloud-based compute tool. They have a tool called EasyBids that will allow you to upload your data and use DCM to Nix to actually turn your images into bids files that can then be processed. And one core step when you upload the data is to make sure that it's actually been de-identified. And so that's where NiiVue's ability to render a brain can say, did the face stripping actually work? Have I removed the identity from these face strips? So again, another example where having a web page-based visualization system can be really useful to the user. Another example of how this has been embedded is with AFNI with their quality control tools. And so historically, tools like FSL and AFNI have shown quality control maps to help individuals decide, did motion correction happen correctly? Did co-registration happen correctly? Did spatial normalization happen correctly? Are there any artifacts in my data? And they would show static images, which are somewhat limited when we think about we really have 4-dimensional time sets to look at. And so with the AFNI QC now, it initially shows you a web page that has a static image that loads very quickly. But if you want to further examine that and say, I want to understand what's happening, you can take any image and click on it, and all of a sudden it becomes a interactive 4-dimensional time series that you can go through and explore. And so it really allows you to understand your data in a richer way than you can do with just static images. And then FreeSurfer is working on their new free browse that will allow people to use a web interface to do their image analysis. And so free browse uses NiiVue as its basic interface. So one thing we built into NiiVue is this idea that it natively understands all the major formats that we're interested in. So it understands AFNI's preferred format. It understands FreeSurfer's preferred formats, but it also understands our interchange formats like Nifty format. And so what's nice about this is if you think about it from a user's perspective, it doesn't matter if you're using AFNI or FreeSurfer, a single viewer will be able to display and see all of the different image formats. And your motor gestures, the way that you interact with the images is similar. So you have a lot of familiarity. And I think the other thing, if you think about these slides that I'm showing you, is the user interface can be as simple or as complicated as the task at hand. So instead of creating one user interface that tries to do everything, you can think about the user interface as being context specific, depending on what task the user has to do. We can provide a lot of controls or very few, but the basic modular viewing tool is going to be the same across these different applications. And then FSL's embedded this with a lot of their documentation to allow you to explore things like their brain extraction tool, and you can interactively explore what the images look like and get a better feel for them. And Ariel Rokem and his team have done a nice job of creating Tractoscope that allows users to explore Human Connectome Project data sets, where you can look at each individual's data sets and explore the connectivity in it and look at maps. And so NiiVue acts as the visualization front end to let users explore these data sets. And then a seventh example is looking at OpenNeuro. And OpenNeuro provides access to lots of neuroimaging data sets. In this example, our own aphasia recovery cohort, where we provide data from chronic stroke patients. And again, users can interactively look at a data set before downloading it and say, what is the quality of the scans? What are the type of scans? Do I understand what the data set looks like? So you can look at a scan both in 3-dimensional times, but as you can see here in this example, this is a functional fMRI bold image where the timeline on the right allows the user to select which volume they're going to view. And so they can start looking for artifacts or other defects within the data. We've also started to move NiiVue as something that you can use on the desktop. So even though our original core aim was to create a web tool, it turns out that there's some things that are kind of nice in terms of user interface of being a desktop application. So a web tool necessarily is self-contained, and it lives in what we call a sandbox. It can't see other files on your computer. It can't do anything with them. In that sense, they're very safe, but it does sometimes limit what you can do. And so we've also provided this. If you have a Mac or an iPad or an iPhone, you can go to the App Store and you can download NiiVue, and you can have a little visualization tool that's ready to go. And it's just a regular desktop application, but it's still based on exactly the core code, so we don't have to recreate it for each individual environment. Another way we can use AI isn't just to segment the brain or identify lesions, but we can also use it in its predictive ability to try to tell us something about individuals' prognosis. So this is a web page that I created with Otto Carnett and his colleagues at University of Tübingen, where we were interested in recovery from spatial neglect. So initially, when someone first comes into a clinic, they after right hemisphere injury, they often ignore stuff that's on the left side of the world. And so in this example, you can see in the inset here where they're asked to find all the Cs, or the mirror image Cs, so all the circles that have a gap in them, they're asked to circle them. And characteristically, patients with spatial neglect tend to identify the objects on the right side of space and ignore those on the left side of space. And so what we did is created a web page where you can upload a map of the brain injury and also provide us some idea of someone's acute impairment. And then we can use machine learning to give you a very accurate prognosis of the recovery that you should expect to see 1 year post-injury, and identify which patients are likely to get better versus those that don't. So another nice example of how we can do edge-based compute. And another example of NiiVue on the web is SliceDrop. So SliceDrop was actually, I think, the first medical viewing web tool. So in 2013, Daniel Hain created this beautiful tool called SliceDrop. It was a very intuitive way to look at medical imaging, but it was based on an older WebGL1, and it was quite limited. So Daniel's now taking his same elegant, minimalistic user interface and wrapped it around NiiVue so that you're using all the modern goodness of a modern rendering, better connectome viewing, and all the new technology we've had. So that's another example of a really nice web page that allows users to get up and running and really explore data sets with a zero footprint. There's no software to install. If you can load a web page, you can load up SliceDrop and take a look at that. So I want to now, for the last couple examples, I want to talk a little bit about things that are still work in progress, but things that we're quite excited about. And so one is the idea of embedding things into Python. And so particularly the Learn team has been very successful at showing how we can do a lot of things with Python. And Jupyter notebooks are really ways that we can empower users to look at data. And one of the interesting things about a Jupyter notebook is ultimately all the graphics in it have to be based on web technology. So DiPy and other Python-based desktop tools that allow visualization rely on desktop graphics APIs that aren't available on the web and on Jupyter. And NiiVue, being based on web technologies, is able to be embedded directly into your Jupyter notebook and allow you to explore things. So our NiiVue is a way that we allow users to explore all the data sets, whether they're meshes, connectomes, streamlines. They can explore those data sets within their familiar Jupyter notebook and really feel empowered to look at those. And then another thing that is directly related to a lot of members in this group, and Jark's been helping me with this a little bit recently, is this idea of going beyond the type of resolution images we're used to seeing in vivo. So when we take MRI or CT images of living humans, we're always faced with the fact that people breathe, they tend to move their head a little, they have pulsation, and they have a lot of susceptibility artifacts. But there's a lot of types of medical imaging that exist that have much higher spatial resolution than what we're used to looking at. And so one example would be histology pathology samples for cancers, or in this example on the right side, I'm showing some images of OCT, where we can take images of the retina of the eye and really see the microvasculature in a way that we can't. And so we're really trying to move into this realm of ultra high resolution images that modern graphics cards require you to think about tiling the data and being able to look at this data in small segments or at different levels of detail. And NiiVue, I think, has a lot of nice aspects in terms of moving into this space. It's able to do a lot at the front end and relies less on the back end than some of the classic tools that are already in this space. So we think this is kind of a nice niche that we can move into that takes advantage of a lot of these amazing data sets that, for example, you can find on Dandy and Neurosift helps you look at. So this is, again, work in progress, but this is an active area where one of the ideas of giving this presentation to this group in particular is to think about feedback of how can we get you involved with this. And so I think this is clearly something we're actively working on right now. And so that kind of is my overview of some of the sort of vignettes. So these are different ways that different people have embedded NiiVue to solve their own particular applications. And what I want to do next is mention what are some of the things that are kind of unique that we can do with NiiVue, and how can we contribute, and how can we leverage other people's feedback a little bit better. And so one thing I would say that we discovered that's kind of nice is that because web pages live in a sandbox, they're considered safe. You can email someone a web page, and because we're using web technologies, we can actually embed NiiVue itself into a web page. So you can save your entire scene as a web page. So if you think about creating a static image and sending it to someone, and you're saying, I'm seeing something unusual in this image. Here's an anomaly. Can you tell me what's going on? The person who receives that image might want to change the contrast. They might want to look at other locations of the brain and see things. And so what's quite nice about NiiVue is we can save the entire scene, where you decide to put the crosshairs, what annotations you added to it, what's the contrast, what are the orientations, all these different features that we can save as a web page, and then you can send it to anyone. And so regardless of where they are, if you send it to a radiologist who's at the airport, they can open the image at on their phone and look at it interactively and start giving you some feedback or sending their annotation back. And myself, I've used this in my class where as a homework assignment where students, when they learn neuroanatomy, they get to actually identify where the neuroanatomy is, and then they can send us back a homework assignment that includes these different features. So this is, I think it's something that you can't do with traditional executables. You can't have the same power you do with web pages. And I do want to highlight Chris Drake, who's our lead developer. This was his brainchild, and I think it's a really nice example of stuff we can do with web technologies that really pushes things to the next generation. We've also thought a lot about what are specific things we want to do in our field to show data. And historically, we've thresholded statistics maps and only showed thresholded data. And now there's a new movement to say, actually, it's really useful not just to see the tip of the iceberg that survives our stringent threshold for multiple comparisons, but we also want to get an idea of what are the trends. Sometimes data sets that look very different in terms of the surviving super threshold voxels have very similar trends underneath. And so we tried to create maps that will show an outline around the areas that are statistically significant, but also show you in much more muted translucent tones areas that are trending in one direction or another. And the other thing I would point out in neuroimaging, typically with a lot of our statistical tests, we'll want to have asymmetrical statistical tests. So our negative statistical threshold will be at a different level than our positive statistical threshold. If we're using the same statistical threshold on both tails, it's usually a sign that we're having to be overly conservative with one of our tails. So NiiVue has a lot of these useful features for how we use statistics in our field. Another thing I want to point out is, much like Python, what I like about using JavaScript as the language to create a visualization tool is that it's inherently a scripting language. And this makes our documentation nice. And particularly because now everyone has a web browser and web pages, our documentations can be web pages, but they can also refer to web pages where the user can insert the code and see it happen in real time. So if you look at our documentation, the documentation often includes live demos where you can, in this example on the lower left, you can see it says see demo usage, and you can click on that and it literally opens up a web page that you can think of as a minimal recipe. And I like to think of a lot of our demos as essentially like a recipe book where you can stream through the different recipes and you can see this minimal source code and you can say, how are these functions used in practice? How can I actually understand these things? And so in this example, you can check different color maps by pressing the different buttons to see the inbuilt color maps, but you can also see that there's a scripting text box that allows a user to define their own color map and really understand what's going on. So I think it brings the documentation to life by having these live demos that let users explore the language and the usage and the API in a really rich way. And so one of the things I would also say, one of the things that's very important about NiiVue is that we've tried to create these live demos that all give you a minimal recipe. And we have lots of these live demos that are all very simple. We do them in pure HTML. So it doesn't matter if you're someone who says, well, I prefer putting things in Angular or React or Vue as my framework. It doesn't matter. Our demos are agnostic. They're just very minimalistic, pure HTML demos. And all of our code uses a very permissive BSD license. So that allows us to be put into commercial software. It allows us to embed our software within FreeSurfer FSL, where myself as a developer, I can't look at FreeSurfer code. I can't look at FSL code, because if I were to do that, then it would be the tainted fruit if I would be controlled by their institutional licenses. But they can use our code, right? So we have this one directional gift that we can allow our code to be embedded into these institutional licenses, into GPL. So it is, I like to think about it as the O negative blood, right? We are the universal donor of source code that you can use regardless of what license you want to use. You can use NiiVue without any restrictions. The only limit is you can't hold us responsible if there's any bad consequences of using our software. So how can you get involved? So one of the real reasons I'm trying to give this talk is that I know that you're a user base that has contributed a lot to our field, and I'm very eager to get future collaboration. So I want to say one of the easiest ways is use our tools. If you find anything that doesn't work or have a feature that you want, you can use our issue button on our GitHub page and tell us, hey, this is a feature I'd really like to see. And that gives us a dialogue where we can kind of think about how we respond back to you. The other thing you can think about doing is embedding your tools into NiiVue. And so one of the really nice things about web pages is that we can take C code and we can recompile it to WebAssembly without having to make any changes in the code itself. We can start using proven, well-known tools directly into our web page. So tools like my own DSAM to Nix, the FSL team's brain extraction tools, FSL tools, FSL mass, ANTS for image normalization, Flirt for image registration, Elastics for image registration. The ITK WebAssembly team has lots of the famous ITK image processing tools, and all of these are available as plugins so that they're all WebAssembly code that you can use directly in NiiVue and take advantage of them immediately. And likewise, if you're interested in artificial intelligence models, we already have demos of Onyx, TensorFlow JS, as well as TinyGrad, showing you how you can plug your AI models into NiiVue directly and use those tools. And likewise, if you're interested in bringing your own format to NiiVue, out of the box, NiiVue supports a lot of formats. So the native voxels, meshes, overlays, and streamlines are, I think, the dominant formats that we use in our field. But there are a lot of other formats that are pretty complicated, and supporting them would necessarily mean creating a core tool that had more dependencies and was larger and would be a little bit slower to download. So what we have is this idea of a plugin model for loading different formats that if you want those formats, you can use them, but they necessarily, because they have larger dependencies and they're more complicated, aren't part of the native minimal install of NiiVue. And so we've already provided a lot of examples, but if you're interested in having your own format supported, it's worth thinking about a plugin as one model to do that. And if you're interested in collaborating, it's really easy to work with NiiVue. And so you can simply clone the repository, and within a couple commands, you have a web page that pops up. And the nice thing about this web page is it's a hot reloadable web page. So now you can change any one of the web pages, any one of the JavaScript files, and as soon as you save the change, the web page reloads and is effectively recompiled with your new features. So it's a really nice way to develop it interactively, that you can, if you want to add a new feature, you have this ability to run a live web page and see every change you make as you make it. And then finally, once you've worked with it, it's very easy. We have a pull request mechanism where if you want to make any changes, you can share them with the rest of the world. And so in this case, Chris Drake has approved one of my own pull requests, but it's a nice way that you can contribute back to the rest of the world and add your features in. And so we're right now on a 3-year mission. So we're supported by the Brain Initiative, and we've essentially, our roadmap has 3 different stages. And so we've completed 2024, and our real goal with that was our outreach to developers and to try to get the edge embedding, to try to solidify our API. And our kind of motto for the last year was any browser. And then this year, we're really trying to engage users. And so we're really working on the desktop apps, the Jupyter notebooks, and we kind of see this as our any platform year. And then the final year, our goal is to really move into the cloud space and really have the anywhere, the federated learning, the data sharing, the big data. And so that's really our long-term roadmap. So I appreciate you having me come here and give you a little bit of an overview of NiiVue, but I'm really interested in any feedback that you guys may have. And so I think I'm going to stop my share there. And maybe this is a good time. I do want to actually, just since I mentioned it, I'll share my screen one more time, because I do think this is a really nice example that I've mentioned before in passing, but it's probably worth just showing this. This is Sergey's BrainShop AI models, just to show how they work with NiiVue. So effectively, you can try you can think of lots of different image processing you could do with AI. So segmentation, parcellation, brain extraction. And so we have lots of different models. We also have now models that will detect anomalies like lesions, but you can drag and drop any MRI scan you want onto this web page. And in this case, you can probably notice from the distinctive aquiline nose, it's actually me as our participant here, but you can choose the AI model, and it literally runs on your computer, and you can say, oh, okay, if I don't like that, you can try a different AI model. If you like it, you can say, actually, I want to create that as a mesh, and you can choose different properties. If you want to 3D print something, it's less expensive if you make things that are hollow, so you can make a hollow image. And then once you have your preferred settings, you can create a mesh, and now you can actually set, if you're happy with the mesh that it's created, you can save the mesh and print it out. And so that's just a nice example end to end of how you can do everything with a web page without installing any software in it. I think it really showcases some of the things we can do with NiiVue as an end-to-end tool.
Thank you, Chris. And I see JB has hands raised. So let's.
Yeah, no, thank you. First of all, thanks. It's a fantastic development, really awesome development, Chris. I have a kind of couple of questions actually. One is, you started by developing that JavaScript library that can be embedded in other tools. And then you, I think, end up with the last kind of slide show of your screen of a natural tool that can embed everything that's in terms of processing and you know, like those seem to be fairly different kind of a goal in some ways. One is to provide an environment where you can launch many different pipelines and things, and one is to provide the community of the pipeline people and tools and software processing software people with with like a standard way of visualization and having a community based like a development for those visualization. What do you think? Where are you going to push your effort, or first of all, do I interpret correctly that, or is that right? Or secondly, where do you want to push? Where do you want to go in kind of a long term or mid term?
Right, and I don't think those are mutually exclusive goals, right? So I think you could think about a lot of things that edge-based lends itself to certain tasks. If you're working in a clinic and a clinician doesn't want to or can't share his data with a cloud server, then you want to do stuff at the edge. If you have a very modularized, self-contained task that you want to do, or a lot of times I think a lot of edge situations are ones where you need a human eyeball to make sure everything happened. So when you're doing segmentation or when you're identifying lesions, do you want to correct the results of the AI? Do you want to give it some, do you want to re-edit it where the visualization is important? And I think there's a streamline of tasks where the edge is the right answer. And then there's also tasks, if you want to do thousands of data sets and you want to download huge data sets, I think Brain Life's vision of saying you can use the supercomputer, the best supercomputers at any public university on the planet at UT Austin. Franco Pacelli has that pipeline where you can use that for you, and you can use their pipeline and it will fully automate a lot of the processing. But there's still probably a need for a human to go back and make sure, am I happy with all those answers? So my sense is what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a modular tool that different developers can say, this is the scale of the problem that I want to solve. How do I do it? And our view is we kind of have a pretty fixed sense of what our lane is, and we're going to provide you this plugin module that you can put into your task, no matter how big or small your task is going to be. We think that most of these tasks require visualizations at some stage, and we're there. That's where we're trying to help you.
I had another. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll let others ask questions and maybe come back to with another one later on. If no one has any question, I can go on with another one. And that's not what the name is of the cat. That's so those kind of community-based projects always have. I mean, it's always kind of a question to me is what kind of a governance do you put on that project? So we fork the repo, we contribute to the to a pull request. Someone from your team is actually accepting the pull request. Is that so? The governance stays, locally at your place in some ways. Do you envisage something which is more like a bits-like governance model where all the contributors from different labs could actually sort of like maybe there's some kind of a steering committee of like where the project should go, and with the voice of course being increased when you have funding to do things, which is often that's how things are driven, of course. So I was curious about the governance aspect of the project and what do you kind of foresee or think for the future or what you would like or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So what I would say is, I mean, that's a problem I guess we would like to have, right? Maybe that's one of the things that I'm trying to develop. But I would say, first of all, for all of our tools, we're not trying to create new formats. We're trying to implement other formats. And so when groups like BIDS and the community TRX formats and other formats come out, that's when we need a lot of community input, I think, to decide what those formats are. And then as different teams implement them, they'll say, these are the things we really need. And so I think I want to be careful to say, I think right now, first of all, we do try to provide feedback of how we make sure that any code pull request, we do review it. we have a mechanism in there to support that. And I'm not sure that right now we're at the overwhelming point where we need a lot of committee to do it. We do have, if you're interested in joining us, any developer, every 2 weeks, we work on a 2-week code sprint process. So every 2 weeks we meet, and all the developers who are interested join. And so this includes stakeholders from FreeSurfer, FSL, AFNI, often NeeLearn as well. And all these people will say, this is our wish list, this is what we want to do. How do we prioritize our next 2 weeks? What did we do in the last 2 weeks? And so far, I think it's worked pretty effectively. I think there is a question of what happens after the end of the funding. The BRAIN initiative had a 40% cut last year. It's just up for having another 20% cut. And I'm sure, as you're aware, the United States is the scientific funding is a bit perilous right now. So we don't know where things are going to go. But I think the other assurance I would give you is we do have a license that allows you to create a fork and do whatever you want. So this isn't an institutional license. We're not going to be, I do worry with some of these institutional licenses that are tied to Oxford University or MGH, that ultimately those type of licenses, you can feel a little locked in. You don't have total control. With this, if you really disagree with everything you say, you can make a fork and do whatever you want, and that's fine, right? So I would say, in one sense, that ability to allow people to do whatever they want keeps us honest, right? If you want to create a better mousetrap than us and have something that totally outcompetes us, people will start using your tools. So I think that that kind of keeps us honest, right?
That it does, and I think it's fair and it's good to have that sort of a possible kind of forking capacity and all things. I mean, I'm 100% behind that capacity idea. I just don't think it's often very useful for the community, where you're going to start to split various efforts, and and it's not the best outcome for that sort of project. And maybe like a more community-driven kind of a governance aspect might help, like what BITS has managed to do in some ways, kind of gather people around that sort of common development. And I think, and it does require some sort of a community steering in some ways, which is so. I don't think that's probably, as you said, probably not at that stage, but that's maybe something to think for the future.
Well, in my own first, and maybe when we go to a resubmission, this is something we should think about. But my own instance is just to say we listen to what the bids committee decides, right? That they already have a proven governance system, and why create another layer? If this is something that we as a community are starting to adopt, I'm happy to say, rather than creating another layer of stuff, I would say I'm happy to say that our visualization tool could certainly be something that follows the expectations of the bids committee, right?
That may be one solution. I don't know. I mean, I'm just putting that as a point of discussion. I think it's it's, one that I have for my own. I mean, some of our own projects. So,
I have questions too. Although you've managed to address some, like, new question appeared and you gave an answer in the slide. So damn you, you stole all those ideas for like embedding the pages with the data. That's great, and that would be really lovely for people to try out. And the question I have, there is not that much of neuroimaging left in this application, right? Besides support of NIFTs. Did you reach out to other communities, even more, like to microscopy, or even people studying, I don't know, pneumonia, something which is really far from neuroimaging, but the same tools could be used?
Yeah, and I would say clearly where we want to go, and I think the Dandy data sets are really good examples of this, but there is a lot of microscopy. There is a lot of OCT, so optical coherence tomography with the eyes. There's a lot of these methods. And I would say we were sort of resistant for a long time because we felt that was a little outside of our lane, and that maybe that was something that NeuralGlancer would be better at. But then I think our end decision is NeuralGlancer. I think we've now started to feel that NeuralGlancer and NiiVue have sort of very different demands. That NeuralGlancer has a huge dependency on a backend and how it's getting served stuff. And we've now added in ZAR format support, and we're working on DICOM web support to try to create much more fluid support, but it's a challenge. So ultimately, any visualization tool we use has leveraged video gamers and what their expectations are, and then more recently AI people. And they tend to, even when AI people look at histology data that are massive data sets, they will tile their data. They look at data in small tiles. And so we have to think very carefully of how we do that architecture. So that's an area we're moving into, but we're moving into it largely because we've started to meet people with this expertise who say, these are the things that no tool exists right now, and this is how we'd like to do this. So this is particularly the company Vertex has been really spurring this work, where they have a lot of people who, this is their meat and bread, is working with these large histology data sets, and they say, none of our tools actually do what we want for the visualization. We solve the other problems. And so what I would say is, in terms of moving into other domains, the challenge is making sure that we have relationships with the experts who know what the problems are. Because I know the problems in neuroimaging. I know how CT scans are. I know about gantry tilt. I know about homogeneity variability in MR and all the things that we deal with. But in these other fields, our team doesn't have a lot of expertise in the workflow. So I think it's really making sure we identify the right users who come to us and say, the reason we like what you're doing is we know that there's a gap here, and we're happy to show you how we work with this data set. So I think it's something we're working toward, but it's a recent development, and I think it's where we could also use more partnerships.
On that note, I also wonder if you looked into presenting this, let's say, at US RSE meeting, right? So research software engineers were similar-minded people who develop all kinds of solutions. They come from different fields. And that's, I think, we're kind of just exposing that there is such a solution could bring those experts and bring interest, because otherwise we are still kind of within our more neuro silo, or getting not too far away. Whenever I see this one is really generic for anything volumetric, I would say. Yeah.
And I do think this is where people like Sergey Pliess and other people who come from much more the engineering are starting to present this stuff at IBSI. And what I would say with all the AI stuff is my own role with the AI revolution is, I'm not an AI expert, but I think that what we can do with a lot of the edge-based AI is realize that AI is a gold rush. And a lot of the people who did really well in the 1849 gold rush weren't the gold miners. It was people like Leland Stanford, who built the railroad tracks, or Levi Strauss, who provided the trousers for the gold miners. And my sense is, if you look at a lot of what I've done with Sergey, it's all the stuff that's not the AI we're going to take care of, and we're going to really optimize, and we'll make sure that it has a very light footprint. And so I think it's finding those right type of relationships where we can say, we know what we're good at, and we can team with other people who are strong or weak.
Did you try to reach out to manufacturers who have this one available on stock, Siemens or Philips?
I think a lot of the big manufacturers have a lot of their own stuff in-house, right? So I'm not sure, but a lot of the smaller companies are already using it. So Vertex would be one example, but there's several other companies that are actively using NiiVue and like it because of its licensing.
Question from Johanna.
Yeah, sorry, it's getting really dark here, so I'm sitting a bit in the dark. Great tool. I was just wondering, because you're talking about AI a lot, and I didn't quite catch which type of AI you were implementing into NiiVue, but to what extent would NiiVue extract information that might maybe sensitive and you would not want to share?
So the first thing I would say is, so there's lots of types of AI. And so this is where I think I would pass off, if he was here, to Sergey Pliess, who's my real partner in this, but I'll try to summarize his basic view. So I would say in AI, one of the things to understand is that in one sense, it's very similar to the general linear model that we use for a lot of statistics, that the statistics to actually generate the model is very complex, but the models themselves, if they're designed right, can end up being quite efficient and simple. So if you think of a lot of general linear models, right, you add in you combine a lot of different factors that are multiplications plus one constant add, right? And so the model that you're looking for is quite simple. And so one of the challenges we have with a lot of AI models is that scientists create these models, but they have incredibly complex dependencies in terms of software that they have and that they require an NVIDIA graphics card with a CUDA driver. And that really impairs users' abilities to use them. And so Sergey's really been the master of showing that specific AI models like MeshNet lend themselves to being very efficient on the compute. And so what he's shown is you actually sacrifice nothing in terms of the performance and accuracy of the model. But if you put in as one of your other cost functions, working on a very efficient, both in terms of memory as well as compute, inference model, that then the inference can be done very straightforwardly. And so what we use is using, and this is by using TensorFlow.js or Onyx or TinyGrad, they're able to use backends that are in WebGL2 or WebGPU. And what's nice about it is that those models can then run on a graphics card regardless of what the user's graphics card is. So I ran that model on my computer that happens to be an Apple Macintosh, but someone who had an AMD graphics card or a Qualcomm graphics card or Intel graphics card or an NVIDIA graphics card can just run it. They don't have to install any software, right? So what you can think about with the edge-based models I was showing you is the only thing that we're sharing is the coefficients, right? We are not sharing the personal data, and then the individual is loading their personal data to the model, and the model is simply running on those generalized coefficients. So in one sense, there's some similarity there to kind of federated learning, where you could think about what you're sharing isn't the private data, it's the overall coefficients that you get out of your models.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see raised hands. And we are coming close to time, so maybe we should stop torturing Chris.
Well, I would say if anyone wants to join any of our developer meetings, drop me a line, and we're happy to include more people, and we're really excited. And Yark's already done a great job of helping us put some of these things together. So, you know, happy to hopefully in another year it can be other members that are on this group who can talk about how they've embedded NiiVue into projects and ideas that are far beyond what I showed off today.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.